Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever felt just completely burned out by politics? And I don't mean just needing a nap tired. I mean fundamentally drained of your energy, your optimism, your very essence. We usually treat this kind of political exhaustion like it's a personal failing, right? Like a lack of resilience or a sign of weakness. But what if we're looking at it entirely wrong? What if this burnout isn't a moral failing at all, but rather a completely predictable, biological, and thermodynamic phenomenon?
Okay, let's dive into this. Why does stepping into the political arena feel exactly like drying out in a barren wasteland? Well, today we are going to explore a really fascinating framework that models this exact experience. We're going to map society using a multi-scale isomorphism model. Now, that's just a complex, fancy way of saying we're going to look at human social groups through the lens of cellular biology and thermodynamics. As you'll see, the exhaustion you feel isn't necessarily the result of malicious political attacks. It's actually just simple physics. It's the natural result of charge differentials in a highly specific environment. Part 1. Anatomy of a social cell. The biology of shared belief. So, to understand how we dry out, we first need to totally shift our perspective. Instead of just seeing society as a collection of random individuals, we need to view it as an organism, where groups act together as distinct cellular structures. A social cell isn't just a crowd of people. It's actually a bounded volume of concentrated truth. Think of it like this. When individuals join together in a shared purpose, their collective belief system acts exactly like a biological pump. They're actively working to keep their internal concentration of good faith meaning higher than the outside world. And their shared social norms? That forms a semi-permeable membrane. This membrane controls what information and energy pass in and out. It's a highly structured, living system, and it requires constant, active pumping to survive the outside environment. Part 2. The political desert, a low saturation environment. So what happens when this vibrant, highly concentrated social cell steps into the broader political arena? Well, it enters an environment that is deeply hostile to its survival. But the hostility isn't what you might think. This environment is known as the political desert. And a desert isn't just empty space, it's a low saturation environment. It's a region where the ambient concentration of moisture, or in our case, truth, productive intent, and good faith exchange, sits so far below biological sufficiency that a social cell literally loses its life force simply by existing inside it. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that the desert does not require hostile intent or some grand conspiracy. The gradient does the work. Because the cell is highly saturated with belief and the environment is entirely depleted, the environment naturally extracts from the cell by mere contact. It's just passive thermodynamic diffusion. Part 3. The physics of extraction. Diffusion as an extraction mechanism. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it visually grounds our metaphor in actual physics. In a low-saturation solution, diffusion is physics, not violence. We can mathematically ground this using the Fokker-Planck equation, which models systemic regression and institutional decay. Basically, it shows how the probability density of capital, talent, or human effort predictably shifts. There's this drift term in the equation that represents the deterministic pull of regulatory loopholes, these sharp, localized gradients of illicit profitability. It mathematically proves that a system will hollow out from within as energy predictably migrates toward these low-resistance paths, shifting away from productive ideals. And during this process, our social cell suffers forced translation, literally stripping its nuanced beliefs into dry policy terms, along with surface wear that actively degrades its protective membrane over time. And this mathematical hollowing out, it perfectly mirrors the ultimate thermodynamic tragedy for the social cell, osmotic inversion. In its initial healthy state, the cell maintains its internal pressure and exports its high-concentration truth out into the world. But under sustained pressure in the desert, the gradient reverses. The cell no longer exports, it actually begins importing the low-concentration ambient noise of the environment. The group starts speaking the cynical language of the desert. Its internal truth density plummets, and it just dissolves completely into the ambient substrate. Part 4. What bleeds out first? The sequence of cellular extraction. Let's move to and see how this builds, because this extraction doesn't happen all at once. It's a tragic progression. By mapping out exactly what the desert targets as the cell degrades, we can recognize the symptoms in our own civic groups. It builds across 5 distinct stages. First, identity dissolves, the specific, directed purpose of the group erodes into ambient noise. Second, possibility bleeds out, and honestly, this goes the fastest. It's actively extracted by professional pessimists and policy gatekeepers who love to tell the cell what is realistic. Third, meaning fragments.
You get a cell that's just going through the motions with no real internal pressure. Fourth, historical continuity is severed. Every generation is forced to rebuild from scratch without inherited wisdom. And finally, the fifth loss, passion. Once passion is extracted, the cell simply stops pumping. Physics handles the rest.
Part 5. Why the desert exists. The origin of the charge. So, why is the political field so dry to begin with? I mean, it wasn't always a desert. This saturation differential was engineered. The political arena inherited a negative charge from a deeply extractive economic system that thermally loaded the environment over decades. To really get this, we contrast two economic models. A Q4 economy is productive. It asks, why should this exchange happen and for whom? Its natural output adds value and meaning to the system. But a Q5 economy? That's purely extractive. It just asks, how do we secure more debt? Its natural output means value is constantly extracted. And since politics is where the economy's rules are set, the concentrated force of this Q5 extraction system totally saturates the political field. It constantly pulls resources to protect its own regulatory loopholes, creating the parched, hostile conditions of the desert.
Part 6. How to survive. Conditions for cellular survival.
So, the crucial point is, how do we actually survive this? We're in a politically extractive desert governed by thermodynamic laws that passively drain our energy. Is it hopeless? No, absolutely not. Survival requires 3 biological imperatives to keep your internal concentration above that diffusion threshold. First, active pumping. Your group has to continuously produce truth and honest assessment, refuse to just adopt the acceptable ambient noise. Second, membrane selectivity. You've got to practice fierce epistemic discipline, strictly filtering out the desert's cynical framing. And third, osmotic partnership. You have to form a shared interior with other compatible cells. Remember, isolation equals maximum surface exposure to the desert. You must bond with others to reduce the surface area being attacked by that drying environment. And this brilliantly illustrates one final, haunting truth about this whole framework. The political arena isn't naturally toxic. It has been thermally loaded by the waste energy of every failed, cynical cell that came before it. Every single movement that compromised its core, every group that underwent osmotic inversion and gave up its passion, their exhausted energy is exactly what makes the sand so incredibly hot for the rest of us today. Which leaves us with a deeply personal application. If you want to engage without dissolving, you have to treat your energy like a precious biological resource. So I want you to look at your own civic life and really ask yourself, how selective is your membrane? What kind of ambient noise are you letting in? And most importantly, who are you forming an osmotic partnership with to survive the heat of the desert? Keep those boundaries strong, keep pumping the truth, and I'll see you in the next explainer.